Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next session of our training series through the Community Table, sponsored by Anthem Medicaid and the Coalition for the Homeless. We would like to thank Anthem Medicaid for their partnership in helping us be able to provide this training to the community for free for those who register. And today with us, we have another member from the Center for Women and Families. Her name is Amanda Martin, and she's the Director of Sexual Assault Services. Amanda, we're going to go ahead and hand it off to you.
All right, thank you so much. So just like last week, if you all could just in the chat, if you want to put your name, title, role, how long you've been employed, and just your personal role, that would be wonderful. I know normally if we were in person, we would be out loud doing this, but we're virtual. So this is what we've got for now, but this works just as well. Just so that I have an idea of who's here with us, that would be wonderful. And so while you guys do that, I will introduce myself. Like Danielle said, I'm Amanda Martin. I'm the Director for Sexual Assault Services. I haven't been with the center for very long. I've only been with the center for maybe 3 months, but I've been working in this field for about 12 or 13 years. So my role at the center, I oversee the sexual assault services. One of those things that falls under that is the prevention and education department for the Kentucky side of the center. And so I help out doing presentations like this and just spreading awareness and education to the community as much as possible. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. You guys can definitely continue to put your names and your introduction in the chat. I can definitely see them. Welcome. I'm glad to meet all of you. Today, we're going to go over recognizing and responding to IPSV, infant partner sexual violence. So why are we here? We all have a part to play in supporting survivors and making it clear to abusers that violence is unacceptable. Because IPSV affects up to 1 in 4 people, it's very likely that you currently are serving someone who has experienced violence. As a service provider, it's critical that we can recognize the signs of abuse and respond in a way that aids in the survivor's healing journey instead of being counterproductive to it. I should also say, like, if at any point you guys have any questions that come up for the things that I'm talking about, definitely put it in the chat. Like I said, I can see the chat and I'll try to stop and answer them in real time as much as I can. If it's something that we'll go over later, I'll also say, like, we're about to go over that. So what are we going to talk about today? So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll have an increased understanding of trauma reactions, and survival reactions. Hopefully you'll also have an increased understanding of the benefits of trauma-informed care strategies and bystander intervention. We're also hoping to increase your awareness of services that we have at the center. But first, let's talk about what is trauma. So SAMHSA, Substance Use and Mental Health Services Administration, defines trauma as an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental health, in mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. So basically, this means that trauma is subjective to the individual experiencing it. I always like to say that trauma is different for each person, just like this kind of illustrates. So whenever trauma happens, there are different survival reactions that then happen. We don't have a conscious choice in which of these reactions we have. They're automatic, and they're our brain's way of protecting us from threats. I'm sure you guys have heard of fight, flight, or freeze, right? Fighting being if you're in that trauma, that survival reaction, and you're trying to fight for your life and trying to survive through fighting. Flight meaning running away, getting away from, and freeze being you just kind of like exactly what it says. You freeze in the moment. The other ones are, in my experience, relatively new to people that are going through this training. So the fawn response involves complying after you've tried fight, flight, or freeze several times without success. So this response to a threat is common for people who have experienced abuse, especially those who have had narcissistic caregivers or narcissistic romantic partners. The fawn response may show up as people pleasing, even to your detriment. You may use compliance and helpfulness to avoid abuse. You disregard your happiness and well-being no matter how poorly someone treats you. This trauma response is often used to diffuse conflict and return to feelings of safety. The other one, the flop response. So this is when we become entirely physically or mentally unresponsive and may even faint. Fainting in response to being paralyzed by fear is caused when someone gets so overwhelmed by the stress that they physically collapse. You may see animals play dead or faint when approached by a dangerous predator. In that situation, like fighting or running away would only instigate the predator more. So tonic immobility may enhance survival and is therefore adaptive when there is no perceived possibility of escape or winning a fight. So one example of the flop response is fainting in the presence of blood or an injection. So that's what happens when that survival reaction happens when a trauma is occurring. After a trauma has occurred, we have people develop trauma reactions or different ways to cope with that trauma. And these are some examples. So like hypervigilance, substance use, a change in sleeping patterns, change in eating habits. They might avoid things or places that remind them of that trauma. They might develop feelings of depression, guilt, shame, anxiety, fear, anger. They might also just feel numb to emotions entirely. They might develop difficulty trusting other people or even trusting the world, or maybe even trusting themselves. They might blame themselves for what happened. And they also might start replaying the scenario in their mind over and over again. One thing that's not listed that's also a very common trauma reaction is having intrusive thoughts, whether it's intrusive thoughts about the trauma itself, or maybe intrusive thoughts about what could happen, which is directly related to the anxiety piece. So when those trauma reactions happen, it's a result of being hyper or hypoaroused. So normally a person stays within their window of tolerance. So if they're feeling annoyed or frustrated, sad or angry or scared, they can generally stay regulated and they're able to deal with the situation without much trouble. But when a person experiences trauma, that window of tolerance shrinks. And it's easier to get dysregulated and get hyper or hypoaroused. So when we talk about hyperarousal, so that looks like being escalated, jumpy, talking quickly, while hypoarousal is that disassociated, endless scrolling on the phone, slow response times, things like that. So thinking about hyper and hypoaroused, and you're thinking about the trauma reactions on the previous slide, which ones do you guys think would be more of that hyperarousal? You can throw it in the chat. I'll even go back so you can see it. So which ones would be that hyperarousal? So that escalated, more that escalated side of reactions. Fear and anxiety, yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's that heightened sense of those emotions. Yeah. Also looking at like hypervigilance, feeling angry. What about the hypo? So more of that like disassociating or almost like trying not to feel. Yeah, using substances, definitely, it numbs you for sure. Avoidance, yeah. Yeah. Feeling numb is a big one too, to look at for hypoarousal. Sorry, my screen just froze up for a second. So like before, these are often a victim's attempt to survive what just happened to them and protect themselves from further harm, not an attempt to be uncooperative or difficult with a responding officer. It is very frustrating dealing with some of these behaviors in the moment. I've even, like with dealing with survivors, I've dealt with people who were yelling at me, even though I knew they weren't necessarily mad at me, just a situation. Or even like had survivors answer, I don't know, to every single question I asked. I have the understanding that, of why those behaviors were there. It is still very frustrating. And I think it's something important for us to recognize that we might still feel frustrated or not really, or even just recognizing that it doesn't make it easy in the moment. Just it's still good for us to have the understanding as to why those behaviors are there so that hopefully we don't take it personally. Oops. Yep, sorry. So that kind of moves us into trauma-informed care. So with trauma-informed care, we try to move away from what's wrong with you, which implies that a person is bad or ill, and instead focus on the question of what happened to you. So like I mentioned, trauma is incredibly common. You'll often interact with people who are having trauma reactions and survival responses. So oftentimes when someone's behavior is erratic or seems abnormal in our point of view for what they've experienced, it's easy to say, gee, what's wrong with this guy? But if we look at it, if we look at some symptoms of trauma and recognize the trauma reactions, then we can ask what happened to you instead. This also helps with building rapport and a sense of trustworthiness, and it helps us avoid making judgments on someone and instead focus on what you're seeing. So focus on the facts of the statement and the facts of the behavior. So listed on here are the different trauma-informed essential elements. So the first one being safety. So that is having a sense of safety, both physically and emotionally. Trustworthiness, which is being consistent and clear and setting appropriate boundaries. So letting a client know, like, this is what I can do, this is what I cannot control. Choice, this is giving back options and control, even if it's an illusion of choice. So it could be like, you can do X now, or you can do Y first, then X later. Either way, whatever X is, it's still going to be done, but this way there is that illusion of choice. Collaboration, so that's working alongside survivors to establish a sense of control. They know themselves and their situation best. That's what has kept them safe before. So it's important to ask those questions of, what have you done to keep yourself safe? How can I help you get to a safe place tonight? Things like that. Empowerment, which is recognizing strengths and playing into them. We also want to look at enabling versus empowering. So moving more towards, I can help you get started instead of I can do this for you. And the last one being cultural humility. So finding value in what we can learn from others and honoring those differences. So what do we do when someone discloses trauma? So the first thing is to remember that they're human and that you're human. And so it's okay to have a human response. So slow down and just allow yourself a chance to think. You can use some compassionate or empathetic responses, such as I care about you, I believe you, I recognize this is difficult. We also want to help validate the survivor. They feel what they feel, and feelings are they're never wrong. We also want to let them know that we believe them We believe their story, even if we think their story might not be completely true or might be exaggerated, it's still their truth. And that's the important piece. No one deserves to experience IPSV, and the fault, responsibility, and accountability falls on the abuser always. So it's possible that someone will disclose trauma, but it's equally likely that you're speaking with someone about their situation, and you'll hear some of these red flags, such as they let me blank. So there's very much that power imbalance of needing permission to do things. They get upset when I blank, so I don't do that anymore. They do that because they care about me. You might also see that their partner drops them off and picks them up from the appointments or from the location. They might frequently check their phone, or their phone might be broken. It's a big red flag. Wearing clothes inappropriate for the weather or season. You might see behavior changes during the appointment that you have with them, especially if they're getting a message from their partner that can cause behavior changes. They might have an exaggerated startle response. They also might miss appointments regularly. So when you see or hear these things, it's up to you to decide how you will respond. And that leads us into how to be an active bystander, because these are some choices that you might have. So a bystander is someone who witnesses or is aware of an event that's happened. So some of the options that you might have are to intervene directly. You can ask the person being harmed if they need help. Support someone who is already helping. Oops. You can tell someone about the incident to elicit more help. Ask people around you to help. You can even video the event if it's currently happening in front of you. The most important thing to think about is safety for yourself and the people around you. If doing one of these things would put you in danger, then it might be better to choose a different avenue to take, because you definitely want to have your safety as a priority as well. So as service providers just doing our jobs, we are potentially labeled as the bad guy, especially in situations involving power-based personal violence. An abuser could be angry with us for helping their partner leave them. They could begin stalking or threatening us. They could even use our relationship with the client to exert power and control over them. These are just some things to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about your safety as well. So how to refer survivors for services. There's a few things you can do. You can ask them to call the crisis line. You can call the crisis line with them. You can even give them one of our purple cards or brochure to kind of help them have the resource to call when they're ready. It's always important to remember with confidentiality, if you call for someone, which we talked about earlier, enabling versus empowering, we want to try to empower people to call. But if you call for them or with them, there are certain limits we have to sharing information about clients. If we don't have that written consent form, we can't share that information with anyone. During the crisis calls also, and we tell survivors this whenever they call, there are limits to confidentiality as far as even what is talked about over the phone. So everything is confidential that gets talked about on the crisis line. There are those limits if there is suicidal ideation or homicidal ideation with a plan, any kind of child abuse or abuse to vulnerable adults as well, are all things that we have to report on to other people. So who do we serve at the center? So our clients, we serve all kinds of different clients of all gender and sexual orientation. Some of our clients are currently in an abusive relationship. Some have recently left that relationship. Some have left their abuser maybe some time ago, but they still have some involvement with the abuser. Some have been away from their abuser and have no contact. And we also, specifically in Southern Indiana, work with secondary survivors. And those are individuals who have not directly experienced IPSV, but have indirectly experienced it. So it could be someone whose parent was in an abusive relationship, or they witnessed domestic violence or a sexual assault, things of that nature. We also work within the community. So we try to work with social service providers, schools, community organizations, and other like clubs and groups to provide education and awareness as well. That way we kind of have that prevention piece throughout the community as much as possible. The other thing to note about our services, because when processing through abuse or trauma, it can take a long time. So we don't time limit when someone can seek services. So even if it's someone who has experienced childhood trauma and they're now an adult, we wouldn't turn them away from services because the trauma wasn't current. Trauma is one of those things that our body and our brains hold that. So we don't want to time limit those individuals from services. So these are the different services that we provide at the center. With domestic violence services, we offer safety planning and problem solving, which our advocates help with, as well as court accommodations, which also includes like legal advocacy. We offer education and victim rights through advocacy, supportive counseling, strength-based case management, and our emergency shelter. With our emergency shelter, we do there is a lethality requirement that we have to be able to stay in our shelter. So whenever a survivor calls our crisis line, we do a lethality assessment with that individual to see if they are able to come to our emergency shelter. With our sexual assault services, we offer, again, safety planning and problem solving. We have hospital accompaniment through our hospital advocates. We offer therapy, both individual and group. We have education and victim rights as well, with supportive counseling, strength-based case management. And we also offer our emergency shelter for those who have experienced a sexual assault. Again, there is that lethality assessment that's done. So I should also say, with the lethality assessment, it helps us determine the level of lethality for that individual. So the higher the lethality, the more likely it is that their perpetrator could attack them to the point of killing them within the next 24 to 48 hours. So we want to make those survivors a priority with getting shelter, whether it's our shelter or sorry, I lost my words, whether it's at our shelter or at like a local hotel if we don't have beds available. The other service that we offer at the center is prevention and education, which we do professional trainings, awareness events, educational presentations, and we also have tons of brochures and things like that that we drop off to different community partners so that that information is out in the community. I realized I talked really fast during this presentation, so I apologize because we are reaching the end and it's not been the full hour. So I apologize. But hopefully, even though I talked quickly, you have an increased understanding of that trauma reactions and survival reactions. and have a better understanding of the benefits of trauma-informed care strategies and the bystander intervention, and just an increased awareness of the services we offer at the center. Are there any questions about the things that I've gone over? Do you need anyone need any clarification on any of those topics? How many emergency shelter beds are available at the center? I believe we have, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe we have 79 beds total. Some of our rooms are specifically for families, and we do have some for males and those identifying with other genders. Can you provide advice on when we are seeing signs of domestic violence, but no one is directly asking for help? If you're seeing those red flags come up, that does make it very tricky because they're not directly asking for help. You can always let them know, like, hey, there are some things that you talked about or that I'm seeing that that makes me a little worried, or you can just let them know discreetly, like, hey, in case you or anybody needs these resources, here are these resources that I can provide to you. You can also, especially if it's a newer client that you're working with, you can also, if you don't feel comfortable letting them know the red flags that you've seen, you can even present the information as if it's something you present to all new clients. Like, hey, something that we let all of our clients know, here are some blanket resources that we'd like to give you in case you need them or anyone else who needs them. So there's different ways you can go about it, just depending on your comfort level and also your rapport with the person that you're meeting with. I would say if it's someone that you meet with pretty regularly, going more of that direct route of pointing out those things that you're observing, I think is completely appropriate as well. So really good questions for sure. Also advice for when you walk into a crisis. Are there ways to avoid triangulation when separating people? I think if there's a current crisis, like with the client and their perpetrator, I'm assuming is what you mean. Okay, so that does make it a little bit more tricky. I think in that situation, yelling at each other. I think trying to get everyone regulated is the most important thing to do. So in that situation, I think it's about trying to get them, I would try to get them separated as much as possible, maybe even letting them like, all right, guys, this is, this isn't helpful for us to be yelling like this, trying to do some de-escalation techniques, trying to get them more grounded. And then if you're able to, if you have the space to take them separately one-on-one, that might be more productive than trying to get them to talk through the crisis all together, if that makes sense. I don't know how your office is set up. So yeah, if it's possible to get them, I think the biggest, during, like when you're trying to get them calmed down, I wouldn't even feed into what they're arguing about. Just trying to get them calmed down is like, or de-escalated would be the primary goal, which can be difficult in itself. I hope this is helpful. I know it's very tricky whenever it's in the moment. But yeah, I think the main thing, just trying not to feed into what they're arguing about, letting them know, like, I hear you, and this is something that I would like to help you guys work through. For right now, we need to try to, calm down a little bit, take some deep breaths, get grounded, and then we can try to talk this through one-on-one. Awesome.
Thank you, Amanda. What is your advice for individuals or agencies that just have a really light touch with clients? So, for instance, maybe an intake worker or a call center, something like that. Do you have any advice on how to serve clients in that capacity?
I think the important thing when you're working with clients in that capacity is just to be, active listening. Like, the more you can actively listen to somebody and allow them to feel heard, the better. You're still going to get clients that are escalated, and it's in those moments, remembering that escalation, that anger is not about you, it's about what they're going through. And then also remembering the self-care piece. So if you, after an intake or after a phone call, if it was a particularly rough time that you had, for any variety of reasons, just being able to recognize those things within yourself, recognizing your own emotions and what you need to be able to take that time before you go into your next interaction with another client is extremely important.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any more questions? Okay, seeing none, we will go ahead and give everybody back some time today. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Amanda for sharing your expertise on this topic. And next week, we will have another training series from the Center for Women and Families, and I believe it will be Jane, who presented last week. And we look forward to seeing you all there. And then the last Tuesday in April, it will be Amanda and myself, and possibly Ashley Tabor as well, presenting on VAWA and emergency transfer plans and all things VAWA COC. So please be sure to tune in for that. We hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you to Anthem Medicaid for making this all possible. As always, our recording and trainings will be posted on our website should you need them. All right, thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Amanda. You did great.